Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Volunteer Technologist podcast. Here we take a look at the different ways that people who are technically inclined volunteer outside of their primary job. Today I'm joined by Chris Miller, and we're going to talk about mentoring both inside and outside the technical community. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing real well, Gene. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and share your experience. It sounds like you've been doing a good bit of mentoring across your career, and I'm interested to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, well, it's I find that it's good to give back. I've been at this about 27 years now, and I'm always excited by watching new developers get started, no matter where they're getting started. I work primarily in development, which is not to discount ops or anything like that, but watching new developers come into the field and try to help them along and maybe give them a leg up where I wish I would have had one has always been a big part of it, but also helping them with making their way through a business situation, because it's different. Coders talk differently to one another than they do when they talk to the business or
absolutely.
Community stuff. So it's really rich territory, but at the end, it also keeps me in touch with new things. You can get frozen as you move along in your career. And it's always good to hear from other people, other perspectives. I learn as much as they do.
That's awesome. And I guess I should probably back up just a minute and have you introduce yourself a little bit and kind of let people know who you are. I kind of forget sometimes that I've been reading up on the people that I chat with, but the people listening probably don't really know who you are.
Probably not, and that's okay. I am not a famous person. My name is Chris Miller. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. I got started back in 94, 95. If you want to go all the way back, it was 87 on a bulletin board when I was 16. But, so give a little bit of old school cred. But, I got my start. I worked at the very first online bookstore. Before Amazon in Cleveland, there was a site called Bookstacks Unlimited, and we were doing business over Telnet in 1992.
Well, that's just neat.
I remember the day Amazon got started, and we were all like, what the hell is this? But I got started there. I had worked on an English degree in college, but was looking for work. And in those early days of the web, they would take anybody who knew a little bit of HTML, which I did. And so I got started there and then moved into some consulting and learned more development and had some really good mentors along the way, which is, you'll find a theme there.
Makes all the difference in the world.
Exactly. So I've worked for agencies. I've worked for consulting firms. I did some time at a startup out in California. I've done big corporate work. And now I'm actually working for my local park system as their website. I've done management. I did about 15 years of development management and about 15 years of coding. So that doesn't add up to 27, but you take the point. It's,
yeah,
it's fuzzy math.
Yeah.
But, I guess the thing that I would hang my hat on besides the mentoring I've done are really two things. Back in 2005, when podcasting became a thing, I worked with a couple of guys, one guy named Ivo Terra, another one named Teen Morris, and we put together a website for serializing audiobooks via podcasts. And it was called podiobooks.com. And Ivo is still out there. He's doing his thing. As a matter of fact, I just started working with him on another project. But at the time, in those early days, it was the only way you could get books like in order. Because when you podcast, you're always going to get the most recent chapter, not the first chapter. I built an engine that would allow people to get things on their schedule. And any donations went to the authors. 75% of them went to the authors. And it had a really good run. It lasted about 12 years, I think.
Well, that's
and then,
cool.
Podcasting matured, Audible ate the market, all of that. And, but that was really great. And these days I'm most proud of, I do some volunteer moderating on Fosstodon, the Mastodon instance. And I'm always excited by the Fediverse. It reminds me a lot of the old days of the web. I'm sure maybe you feel that way. And a lot of folks from my generation, it reminds them of the old days of the web. But, again, it's that open source community that really inspires me. So I enjoy being a part of that.
So to kind of Bring us back to being fully on topic. How have you applied that mentoring throughout your career? I take it you've done a good bit of work with helping with some of the developers and stuff of that nature.
When I moved into management, I did it because I was getting bored with the code problems I was solving. And I found that I really enjoyed helping other people work through those issues and kind of clearing the path. And so mentoring became a big part of just the daily gig, which I really enjoyed. And, sometimes I was a better mentor than others. You learn. I mean, mentors have got to learn too. That eventually, working with people at my day job, eventually became working with a boot camp here in Cleveland and going in and helping people with do mock interviews, so that these folks coming out of the Java or C# boot camp that they were going through for 16 weeks would know what to expect when they're walking into an interview, what people are going to expect of them. It became kind of a soup to nuts. Here's how you get started. Here's how you continue. And then for some people that decided to move up in management, it was management mentoring about, the tech is still important, but helping people learn how to communicate and how to speak to business people and how to, it's no secret that a lot of us techies are fairly socially awkward or anxious or something. Helping people through those situations so that they can succeed and other people can see how good they are at what they do. That was a lot of it. Was I want each and every developer out there to shine. Everybody is pretty brilliant when you get down to it when you're working in this field.
Yeah.
So it's a broad spectrum. It spans about 15 years of work. And it was always something that just kind of came along with the job, because I have known people who have had very bad managers, and I have known people who have had to work their way up trying to figure it out. And in some ways, I had a little bit of that at the beginning. And it seems to me that it is a far better thing to help someone along, to reach and help them. And, you change someone's life that
Absolutely.
than to just pretend it's Thunderdome and two people enter and one person leaves,
One of my favorite managers told me that if he had done his job right, more than one person on his team would be perfectly capable and willing to take his job.
Absolutely.
One of his goals was to basically develop somebody so that they had the capability to be his replacement if they so chose.
Absolutely. And having them know that. A lot of people have the skills and just don't know that they have it. So I don't like the word empowering because it's such a buzzword, but in some cases it's appropriate. But when someone knows their own competence and is, if not comfortable, then certainly able to navigate those waters, I think it goes a long, long way. And confident technology people are desperately needed as a counterbalance to some of the insanity we see in the business world. And that's a whole topic, and I'll try not to dip my toe too far into that. But rational thought is often a premium.
Yes. I know that for me, having people who are willing to mentor me, and that being combined with being in the right place at the right time, which sometimes equates to just luck of the draw, has really facilitated me to do most of the things that I do today. And it's always nice to see that see and hear about how other people are kind of filling those roles of mentoring.
Absolutely. I used to really enjoy, I used to go to, there's a local thing called Pi, Ohio, where I live in Ohio, and PyCon, the Python, I was involved with the Python community sparingly, but I had some friends that were very deep into it. And I used to love going to those conventions because it wasn't networking. It was meeting people, and you would meet people who would mentor you for an hour, and it would be an amazing experience. And I have been mentored by developers older than me, developers younger than me, all different shapes, sizes. And it really broadens your perspective and makes you think in different ways. And, You need that because in our industry that changes so quickly and yet doesn't change at all. It's really important to keep your mind fresh
Yes,
and pliable.
very much so. And it's also really important to learn how to communicate what you've done.
Yes.
I've had some coworkers in the past that one of my personal mentoring goals has been to help them help other people know how good they are at what they do. Because some of them have been incredibly brilliant, but have fit into that bucket of people that you described earlier of either a little bit awkward or they feel like they have imposter syndrome or any of the other varieties of things that make them not speak up. And because people don't hear what they're doing, they assume they're not doing, which couldn't be farther from the truth.
I think, in our profession, it is one of the pitfalls is we only see the flaws, and we don't enjoy our victories very much. And we certainly don't hang our medals on the wall.
Yeah.
And maybe we should, maybe a little trophy case is a good thing. Some achievements, it's not a bad way to go, but you're right. Learning how to communicate those to people who don't understand the technology is learning to communicate with non-technical people is absolutely essential if you're moving into certain parts of your career. And it's hard because they don't think the way we do. And I'm not saying they don't think. I'm not casting aspersions, but they have a different set of priorities and a different way of thinking about things.
Well, and a lot of times your customer, be it an internal customer or a paying customer or the group that you're volunteering for, whoever you're interfacing with as your customer, a lot of times the reason that they want you to do your thing is because they don't understand it. But you've got to be able to communicate with them in terms that they understand so that you can make sure you're actually doing the right thing, let them know what you need to know, and learn what it is that they need you to know.
Yep.
And that translating techie to non-techie and from non-techie into techie is incredibly important for, just determining requirements for a project.
Yeah, and building a relationship with that client, customer, person, because they have to trust you. And a lot of people don't trust us. People don't trust what they don't understand. And if we start talking in, TLAs and XTLAs and, the whole, all of our domain specific language, which works for us because we know what we're talking about, it'd be the same as if you walked into an accounting meeting and they started spinning up all of their lingo that you don't understand, and you would feel awkward and untrusting and all. And, I think a lot of us may feel a lot more curious than maybe. I think that's a defining trait of a lot of technologists is we're curious. So we're willing to go learn that. But a lot of folks on the other side are not. That's not what they do. And that's not what they're interested in.
And that's
fine.
Okay.
Yeah. That's okay. That's not their role. I know that sounds a little patronizing and I apologize, but I'm trying to make space in the world for non-techies, right?
When I did help desk support for a while, specifically end user support. And I would tell people all the time that if everybody knew how to do all the same things, it'd be really boring. I'm really good at what I do. And in this particular case, I was on a university campus. I was like, I don't know 90% of what the professors and administrative staff that I'm helping fix their technology, I don't understand all the stuff they do any more than they understand what I do. But I learned how to communicate with them, and we developed that mutual trust between each other. And I trust that they know what they're talking about, and they would trust that I know what I'm talking about. And the two of us together could get the whole job done. But either one of us by ourselves couldn't get the whole process done. Like I could put a computer in a classroom and I can set up a lab, but I can't teach the kids to use it, at least not at that time.
No, you're absolutely right. And, understanding that, it all comes together as a team is really important. There's another side to that, which is the arrogance of the techie and the arrogance of which is everyone else is an idiot and I could run the business better than all of them. And if that were true, you would be running your own business instead of working.
Yes.
And so I saw a very funny video by Jeff, the guy who runs guy who runs fireship.io, and he said, developers only have two paths: imposter syndrome or megalomania. I laugh because that's I switch back and forth between that, and I think everybody does.
I think there's a healthy balance in the middle there somewhere.
Exactly. So, that is also an important part of mentoring, is being able to say to someone, slow your roll a little bit. You're smart, and that's great, but smart in this arena doesn't mean smart in all arenas.
What are some ways that you have found that you can communicate some of these topics that you want to mentor people on to, like, how do you broach those topics with the people who need to hear them? So like at a boot camp, obviously they're there to learn. They're probably already really receptive to a lot of this. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of other cases, I'm imagining that there's some, hey, I think you could probably stand to hear this. Like, how do you go about starting that mentoring relationship and getting things going?
You've got to build the trust first. You've got to have a relationship. You can't lead in with, like, if I took you aside at work and say, hey, dude, don't do this. You're never going to. And, why would you?
Fair point.
You don't have that relationship. You don't have that trust. So you've got to build that first. And I don't mean like in a manipulative way, but as two people having a conversation with different experiences and who are definitely invested in one another's well-being.
Mm-hmm.
It's only after that you could say, hey, I noticed you did this thing. Why did you do that thing? What were you trying to get to? Because here's how it came off in the room. And here's how people reacted. Was that the desired intent? There's a Socratic method to it of asking the questions. And again, it's to get people reflecting on what they're doing, because in the thick of it, you don't have time for that. But it's only through that kind of reflection that I think we learn about who we are and about what we do wrong. I had a mentor come to me once and said, I think you thought you were being funny, but it didn't play well. You got to read the room. And here's how you can do that. And he was absolutely right, because I noticed I use humor when I'm nervous, and it was all falling flat on me. And that's normally how I win the crowd over, and it wasn't winning anybody over. So, I think that's the main technique is helping people after you have some trust and some relationship to find their blind spots and help them reflect upon them. You can't just flip a switch for a habit that you've had for a long time, or especially a defense mechanism, but you can learn to recognize it and hopefully plan for it. So I think that's the key.
You can learn some self-awareness too that will help you see it in yourself when it happens. Doesn't always help with prevention, but it does make you aware enough that hopefully most people will become humble enough to be like, wait a minute, I don't think that came off the way I meant for it to. Or, you know what, that was a little harsher than I intended. Let me back up. I apologize. Mm-hmm. And then proceed on with what needs to be done.
You hit on a good word there, humble, humility. That has to be a part of our practice. Just because we know a lot about a thing doesn't mean we know a lot about everything. And it doesn't give us the right to run roughshod over people. I have seen people who were absolutely correct speak up in ways that completely undermined the argument. And I know that wasn't their intent, but they think they're speaking truth to power when really what they're doing is denigrating someone on their own team. And that erodes trust. You need that trust if you're going to work together. You have to be able to rely on one another.
Presentation is almost as important as the information being presented. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at all the various ways we consume information now. Presentation is key to getting us to pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have the attention to do so. And that's a whole other topic of conversation is,
yes,
the cost of task switching, attention deficit, all of that. There's a lot of, I have a friend who you may talk to one of these days. His name's Tom Gideon. And he had a podcast called The Command Line, where he talked about the practice and profession of coding. And the practice of this is, I mean, it comes off sounding like a Zen master or a guru or something, but there is a craftsmanship. There is a meditative side to this. There is a reflectiveness to it that I think it's good and virtuous to cultivate. That doesn't mean that everyone has to do it. I mean, I'm not trying to start a religion here, but the idea of cultivating some humility, reflecting on what you're doing so that you can be more effective is just a good strategy.
Yeah.
Let alone anything else.
I definitely agree with that. The learning those things is also one of the hardest things to do. Learning the humility, learning the introspection is very challenging.
Absolutely. And making room for other people to have a bad day. I mean, everybody at any moment you meet them is doing the best they can in that moment. It may not be much, but they are legitimately doing the best that they can. So make a little room for that. Give them a little slack. I mean, if they turn into a predator and they start taking advantage of it, that's another conversation. But, day to day, that's not who you're dealing with most of the time.
When in the context of what we're talking about, generally giving people the benefit of the doubt is the appropriate response.
Yep.
Until somebody proves you wrong, benefit of the doubt is the appropriate way to react to most things.
Assuming, we used to say, assuming positive intent.
Yeah.
Is, especially in this era we live in where everyone is pretty knee jerky and, looking for a reason to be offended,
right.
Making a little space for that benefit of the doubt, that assuming positive intent it'll help your brain. It'll help your anxiety, if nothing.
Oh, absolutely.
That's not a reason to do something. I don't know what is.
Yeah. There are plenty of ways that we all find to offend each other, and in a constructive way, letting somebody know when they have offended you, or maybe letting your coworker know that there's a fair chance that they just came off in a very offensive manner. Those are appropriate things, but don't assume that they intended to offend everybody up until the point that they've proven you wrong.
Yep. And, that leads to like the last piece of the mentoring that I go to. I'm a book person, and I will always push people, I always have a book ready for when someone is in a particular situation. And I think it's appropriate, to go and read and better yourself. The mentor can only point in the direction. You have to go walk through it.
Do you have any go-to books that are your kind of bog standard? I use these, 75-80% of the time whenever I'm looking to hand somebody a book.
It's funny. It kind of depends on what the situation is and what we're mentoring about. But one that I've used a lot, crazily enough, is just the first chapter of The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
That's not one I would have expected you to say.
Well, no. And it's, of course, but what's interesting about that is it shows the way to think about strategy and what conditions you need to think about when you're assessing a situation. And I think that's one of the things that we need to learn first is, how do we know where we are? And he talks about, you have to understand heaven or the weather, because he's talking about a battlefield or the landscape and all that. But all of that is a metaphor for your office situation. So believe it or not, having people just that first chapter, having people read that and then discuss that is a good place to start. There are other things along the way. There are business books that have proven to be useful, depending on what you're doing. There's one called Crucial Conversations, which is good about the really hard communications. If you're a new manager, there's one called The Invisible Spotlight, which he made a huge impact on me, because he wrote the line, "You are the person your staff talks about when they go home and have dinner."
Yeah, I can see how that would be impactful when that revelation hits.
Yeah. And you don't think about it that way when you step up in any kind of leadership position.
Yeah.
So, it's not even management. It's really leadership.
Yeah.
But, honestly, as far as like the technical stuff, there are so many good resources out there, and I could, I couldn't throw a rock and hit, it's just, people love clean code. People don't love clean code. I mean, it gets into I think having those I think you learn more through the conversation and not networking, but meeting people. I think there's a difference.
Yes.
Meeting and talking with people, I think, is probably the best thing there.
Networking is more about making business contacts or professional contacts, whereas meeting people and having conversations and the like is more about actually relationship building. At least that's kind of to me, that's the differentiator.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the one thing that social media has, but it's built on everything that's been around since bulletin boards and Usenet and all that, is if you walk into that space and you can be open, you can have some really great experiences, learning experience. I mean, that's how you and I met.
Yeah.
Through that space. And I have made people that I consider that I am friendly with. I don't know. I'm a little funny about friends. Are we friends? I don't know, because we've never met in person, but that's a whole thing. But, there is an amount of caring there. And because of that, conversations happen. I think that's the best learning that you can do, whether it's, if you're doing it in your Discord server with your friends, or you're you're supporting someone's Patreon and you're talking to people through that. I just think that openness to the conversation is super important.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And that resonates with me as well. One of the books you mentioned, Crucial Conversations, is one that I've seen come up both professionally and on the academic side. It was actually one of the ones that I had to read for one of the classes I took in college. And then several years later, it came up again as part of a professional thing that I was doing. And I think it was just as applicable in both scenarios, both from the, hey, I'm just learning about how to deal with people, and, oh, I need to really think about how to have these harder conversations, of the kind of like with the developer type conversations of, hey, you wrote this to do this, but that doesn't actually solve the problem.
Right.
And being able to have that conversation in a constructive manner, that was very helpful to kind of get refreshed on some of that.
It'd be interesting if you had to read Crucial Conversations before doing a group code review. It's very clever that you were able to do that in one line, but I mean, come on, man. So, I mean, I, as a rule, I'm not a fan of business books. I think a lot of them, you could get 3 paragraphs out of it and get the most of it. But there are a few good ones out there, like that Crucial Conversations, like the Invisible Spotlight, especially for leaders in those situations. That's good. Day-to-day developers on the ground, I think you could go back to some of the classics and look at Ben Franklin had a list of 13 virtues he tried to cultivate, and each week he would work on a different one. Looking at some of those old style things, if not to adopt it whole style, but to use it as a point of reflection and say, what kind of things do I want to work on? Build a discipline, build a practice. And, I stole that again from Tom because he did it and introduced me to it. So credit where credit is due. But that discipline of practice, not just in how you write your code or how you build your systems, but in how you move through the world. You don't have to be perfect. Everybody has a bad day, and you're not going to be a monk. But it's just being an ounce of self-awareness. If we can get that, we're already better off.
I agree. Are there any particular places that you would point people who are, I guess on 2 questions, any particular place you would point people who would like to look at being mentors, and any particular places you know of that are good to go if you're looking to be mentored?
That's a really good question. And I don't know of a specific place.
Okay. Or let me rephrase part of that then. If not a specific place, a specific type of person that you might interact with, either professionally or personally, that might be a good candidate to talk to about, hey, would you maybe be interested in helping me develop a little bit?
Yeah. I think that finding someone that you admire is a good one. Finding someone who works very differently from you works as well. I think those are the 2 places that I would start. Sometimes they're more senior than you are. Often they are. They don't have to be. They could work at a different business unit or do a different thing. I once had a guy who was my peer who he and I did not get along at all. We had different philosophies on things, but I wound up learning an awful lot from him through something that now I would consider a mentoring relationship. Mentoring does not mean being subservient. You're not the Padawan to the Jedi Master. You're there to have a conversation and learn some things. And your mentor will learn from you too. So I think, in your communities, if you see someone, you admire the work they do, you like them well enough, or you see a skill they have that you would like to cultivate, not absorb, cultivate, because you've got to build it. I think just approach them and ask if they'd be willing. And then there are lots of opinions about what makes a good mentoring relationship online. There are many models for this. But I think sitting down, and if they say yes, then say, all right, well, here, know what you'd like to get out of it. Know how often you'd like to meet. And then it turns into not therapy, but kind of feels that way sometimes, where, you just work through things. And, again, you'll talk about professional stuff. You'll talk about personal projects, that kind of thing. But you can set those boundaries, I think. But do walk into it having some idea what you want out of it, because mentorships don't last forever, and they are different than a friendship. You may be friends with your mentor, and that's great. But, I've had mentors that I was not friends with, usually in a business situation. That's okay too.
Cool. And if somebody would like to reach out to you to maybe continue this conversation or to just contact you in general, how would you recommend they find you on the internet?
The easiest is my website. It's ctmiller.net. It's a hodgepodge of stuff, but you can find out where to find me. You can also find me on the Mastodon instance. I'm there as Gru Proof, like you might be eaten by a Gru Proof. Those are the two main ways I would reach out to me if you wanted to find me. I'm not hard to find. You just, need to look in the right place.
Yeah, and I'll be sure and include links to both of those in the show notes, so anybody who's interested should be able to see it right in their podcast app without any trouble, or see it on the website.
Cool, thanks.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today, and I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Before we go, I'd like to thank those of you who have boosted in support for the show. It is very much appreciated. This is a value for value podcast, which means I rely on listeners like yourself contributing back to fund it. As such, I'll never charge you to listen, but producing and hosting it does cost money. If you got value from this episode, I ask that you contribute by sending a boost through a modern podcast app like Fountain or Cast-O-Matic, or via the Support the Show link in the show notes that are visible in your podcast app. You can also find the show notes and transcripts at volunteer-technologist.com. If you would like to come on the show, or know someone I should reach out to about being on the show, please send me a message via one of the links at the bottom of the show notes. Thanks for listening.